Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public.
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
But you need to prepare for and assume
strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
That this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the US.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't and the worst happens.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Live from the nation's capital, Fort Defiance in the United States of the Federal Reserve. It is Friday, the 24th of April, the year of our Lord 2020. You're in the War Room for War Room Pandemic, episode 136, with over or almost 6.5 million downloads. A behemoth. Plus 100 million views throughout the world, which we're going to lay through the math over the weekend. John Fredericks Radio Network, America's Voice.News, which is the streaming platform for the Trump Revolution. Now Dish 219, Newsmax TV, now in 70 million homes. Also, FM 99.1, 103.9 in Chicagoland, throughout the world, nexus.org, IRRS, to the 250 million English-speaking people out there throughout the world that they reach. And also, G News and GTV, subtitled in Mandarin, blown through the firewall later in the day to all the VPNs and all the citizens of China who are trying to stand up against this totalitarian dictatorship that you have to live under every day. That would be the Chinese Communist Party. Jack Maxey, Jason Miller, Raheem Kassam, all in the War Room. Greg Manns on watch in the analytics department. Vish Burra in the team on production. We've got Ben Weigarten from The Federalist later in the show. Magnificent article on Chris Buskirk's American Greatness, about this is the Tiananmen Square. This pandemic's the Tiananmen Square of a generation. Also, Amir Adnani from Uranium Corp. Big news out of the White House yesterday. The mining industry for uranium, we're back on point. He's going to be here to give us a quick update. And then, Elizabeth, you're later in the second hour talking about the Vatican and the secret deal with the Chinese Communist Party. Yes, Cardinal Zen, the living saint, and all the underground house Catholics are being sold out by the Vatican. Shock. I'm so shocked on that. But we want to start off. Big day yesterday. Want to report that Jason Miller is taking the Tide Challenge, or the Tide Pod Challenge overnight. He's currently under doctor supervision. That would be Dr. Jack Maxey. All strike lawyers. His name is Jack Maxey. I'm just kidding. We're joined now by a guy I think it's a real hero, Dr. Vladimir Zelenko. And if it's not for Dr. Zelenko in the early days, when the history of this is written, in the early days of this, when it looked like it was, I think, New Rochelle, correct? It looked pretty grim. Nobody knew what was going on. We know almost nothing about this virus as is, right? And we're going to get into the president's, the bleach and the light in a little while. But people know very little about this virus. And we're digging down to find out. Remember, we're the first guys to say, hey, look, we don't know what happened in Wuhan and the P4, but it's got to be investigated, right? All that's got to come forward. All the information has got to come forward. We had Solomon on yesterday about guys in Fort Detrick. We'll talk all about that a little later. But Jack, I want to turn over to you. This is an American hero, Dr. Zelenko.
Absolutely. Dr. Zelenko represents everything that's best about this country, about people taking initiative. And here's this guy who was reading up on some of these treatments that he was seeing around the world, and he decided to take a chance, and he's had phenomenal results. And I think some of the things that I'd love, Doctor, for you to explain are early.
But isn't all this fake news? I keep every day, all I hear is another report, another study. I got Fauci, I've got Veterans Affairs, I got UVA, I got you and Zelenko are a couple of nut jobs, right? No, seriously, I'm inundated now by media all day long that Hydroxy was Jack Maxey and War Room Pandemic and Fox and Laura Ingraham, and you had Dr. Grace on here, and you got Zelenko, and you got all these madmen that are prescribing this stuff. Nothing works. It's all a placebo. What's the reality?
Well, put it this way. If I get to be a madman alongside Dr. Zelenko, I'll take that as a great honor. Doctor, welcome to our show, and we'd love to just hear what you're talking about. We know you're writing a paper discussing your results, and you have the floor, sir. Please tell us what's going on.
So thank you so much, and God bless you. Thank you for having me. So I'll just give you the background. I'm a doctor for 35,000 people who live within a 1 square mile. And I knew that when the virus will hit this community, it will spread because of the population density. And basically the whole focus of the world up to this point has been to build more respirators. There's been zero emphasis on how to have a clinical intervention, pre-hospital, in the primary care office that would slow down, prevent, arrest development of catastrophic pulmonary complications. So every doctor around the world at this point has been telling patients that come into their office that have the infection, go home, pray, drink fluids, take Tylenol, and if and when you develop pulmonary complications, go to the hospital, you get intubated, and then you have a 50% chance or more of dying. That's the treatment model up to this point. Now, nowhere in medicine ever do we have an approach where we let a fire get out of control before we try to put it out. So, for example, someone has the influenza virus, they come into the doctor's office within 48 hours, they're given Tamiflu. Someone has strep throat, they come into the doctor's office, get antibiotics before they develop rheumatic heart disease and need open heart surgery. Someone has an infection on their foot, for example. They don't wait until they become septic and half dead before we treat it. Someone who has appendicitis, we don't wait for it to rupture before we treat it, except when it comes to COVID-19. When it comes to COVID-19, we wait. We allow a subset of patients who fall into the high-risk category that have a 5 to 10% chance of dying to develop these terrible infections. The government tells you not to treat them. They tie our hands. The patient ends up in the hospital, half dead, and then they do studies that came out recently, and all these studies have one thing in common, that they are done on the sickest of the sickest patients on ventilators. They cherry-pick these patients who have a mortality rate above 50%, and then they come to the conclusion that these patients, the medicines didn't help. And I agree, they don't help at that point. I could have told them, could have saved them a lot of money. So the key here, and the nefarious, evil, terrible lie that's being propagated, is that they take data or results that apply to a very narrow spectrum of patients, and then they make a logical fallacy and generalize it so that they disparage this medication so that to say it doesn't work. You cannot make that conclusion from flawed studies that are designed to fail. So let me tell you my data, okay? I saw 1,450 patients diagnosed with COVID-19. Out of those, I divided them into two groups, high risk and low risk. Low risk I did not treat because they're going to get better without any intervention. High risk, defined as over the age of 60 with symptoms, under the age of 60 with symptoms but have chronic medical problems like cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure, things like that, or anyone that just really looks sick in my office, toxic, difficult breathing. I group them into the high risk category because they have a 5% chance of dying probably in this country. And I treated those patients, 405 patients that fell into that category, out of almost 1,500 patients. So it's a minority. It's not a majority. But they are the high-risk patients. If you look in the hospitals, these are the patients that are dying. And I initiated treatment, and here's the key. I initiated treatment based on clinical suspicion, even without confirmatory testing. I did the testing, if I had the tests, but I did not delay treatment for 72 hours because it took 3 days to get the results. And those are the crucial 72 hours that if we intervene early, we can reduce the viral load in such a way that the compromised person's immune system could actually clear the infection without the development of these terrible acute respiratory distress syndrome or pneumonias. Now, my data shows like this, the following, that out of those 405, I had 2 patients die, 4 patients on the respirator. Now they're off the respirator, and 5 or 6, I forget, admitted in the hospital with pneumonia for IV antibiotics, and most of them are home already. Statistically, you would have expected 20 dead, and a multiple of that, probably around 30 or 40 on a respirator. So that was a significant order of magnitude better outcome than was statistically being reported. I made a YouTube video addressed to the president said that, look, I found something important. Next day, Mark Meadows called me. He wanted to know what I was doing. I told him. He said, but at that point, I only had a very few number of patients. So obviously, you couldn't make generalized conclusions from that yet. And then he told me to keep in touch. I had his cell number and email, and I periodically, every few days, gave him updates. Then Sean Hannity somehow got to me, and he read my written protocol on air. That night, he presented it to the vice president. Then 2 days later, the Mayor Giuliani called me, and I did a 45-minute podcast since then with him. And since then, the world has exploded. I've been literally consulted by governments because this is a world war, you see. 182 countries are fighting the same enemy, and no one really has an answer. Now, the answer that I developed costs between $12 and $20 per person. And it's oral, it's pills. And these are old drugs. Azithromycin is the most common antibiotic in America. Hydroxychloroquine is 60 or 70 years old, used for malaria prophylaxis, and rheumatological diseases. I have so much experience with this drug. It's used for rheumatoid arthritis, lupus. Never had any problems. I spoke to 3 electrophysiologists. These are cardiologists specializing in the electrical system of the heart, the rhythms. And I said, well, because everyone says side effects, they're dangerous. So I said to them, well, let's quantify that. Let's really see how dangerous they are. So amongst these 3 electrophysiologists, they had 100 years of clinical experience. I said to them, did you ever see a complication from hydroxychloroquine? No. I said, can you quantify the risk? They said, probably 1 in 1,000. I don't know. So think about it this way. If you have 1,000 patients at a high risk, and I give this medication to 1,000 patients, maybe 1, theoretically, may have a negative outcome. Maybe. But 100 will be saved. So everything in life is a risk versus benefit analysis. You get into the car, you take a risk of dying, but you go to work because you need to make money. So you every second of your life, you're making risk versus benefit. And medicine is no different. So I'm not saying we should treat everyone. Yeah, go ahead.
Doctor, could I ask you a real quick question? Because I know a lot of our viewers are questioning it. Do you see any benefit to the zinc along with the hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin?
I was the advocate that started this. Let me explain to you how it works. It's not magic, okay? If you had the scientific basis for what's going on, you would understand, and it will answer all your questions. So, is that okay? Can I explain to you how it works?
Absolutely. Yeah, by the way, Doctor, we also want you, just keep going, but we would like to, can you stay over for the next segment too after we break for a commercial break?
I'll stay as long as you want.
Okay, fine. Keep rolling.
Thank you, Doctor.
So zinc is well known to inhibit viral replication, which basically means the virus can't grow or reproduce. The way it does that is that it inhibits an enzyme that's within the cell called, well, it doesn't matter. It's called replicase. What it does, that enzyme is essential for the virus to make copies of its genetic material. The problem with zinc, it doesn't get into the cell. It's like oil and water. They don't mix. So zinc is a positive charged ion. The cell membrane is like cholesterol, basically, oil. So the zinc cannot cross into the cell. And that's a problem because that's where the virus is. So what hydroxychloroquine does, are you ready? It opens the door and lets the zinc in. That's it. In other words, you have a kill weapon, but it can't get to the battlefield. Hydroxychloroquine opens the door, delivers the weapon to the battlefield, you have good results. And the antibiotic is there, azithromycin, because we know that when lungs are damaged by infection, they become vulnerable, susceptible to bacterial pneumonias. So the antibiotic is there as a guard, so to speak, by the front door. If the bacteria wants to get in, it kills it before it takes hold. That's it.
Wow.
And
can I just go through some? Yeah, but let's go. I want to ask you just quick questions. I'll tell you what, we're going to take a commercial break. Let's do this. Doctor, if you can stay. Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, the hero of the Battle of New Rochelle in this global war against the, as the president calls it, the invisible enemy. Hashtag War Room Pandemic. We would like to get all your questions. If you can come in, you're part of the community, give us hashtag War Room Pandemic. The questions we should be asking Dr. Zelenko. You're watching the global broadcast of the #1 show in everything dealing with pandemics, the economic crisis that it triggered, the financial crisis on top of that, the geopolitics. We're going to get to all that this morning. We'll be back in the War Room. Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, Jack Maxey, and the entire team in just a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. For all the media producers out there in the mainstream media, we either have the greatest hero in the early stages of this fight against an invisible enemy or a total charlatan. Okay? If you listen to the mainstream media, relentless. That hydroxychloroquine and all the other combinations are nothing but voodoo. So, Dr. Zelenko, how do you counter that? You've now seen this onslaught that's coming, and I realize that you're saying that the studies are not done. Are you coming out with a paper? Are you going to come up with some research? How are you going to back up? Since in the field, you saved all the folks in New Rochelle. How do we actually take it to the next level so you can combat this relentless media narrative that you're a huckster and that this is a dangerous thing that Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump, the War Room Pandemic guys, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, that everybody's pushing?
First of all, correction. It's not New Rochelle. It's in Monroe, New York, just to be correct.
Okay, Monroe.
And thanks. And the way I really have no patience for political whores that sell their souls for money and politics. So I don't listen to them. But what I do, I'll say the following. History and science is objective truth. History will prove who was on the right side of history, who was on the wrong side of history. Galileo and Copernicus, it took them 50 years for their ideas to be accepted. I hope it doesn't take 50 years. Now with the internet, hopefully it just takes a day to spread the truth, and people will see. Now, I am coming out with a study, yes. It's going to be published in the higher journals, I hope. And the only reason why I didn't come out with it before, it's only been 4.5 weeks, and I've been seeing 100 patients a day. You know, Dr. Dudier in France has 800 people on his team. I have 5. I mean, I was working 21-hour days with 8 kids that I have. So I don't understand when I was supposed to come up with the data while I'm in the middle of treating hundreds of patients. But now things have calmed down. I put together the data. It's being analyzed by the highest level researchers. Because I'm not a researcher. I'm just a simple doctor on the front line. And the data is going to come out, and it's going to show the following. 95% reduction of death. 95% reduction in intubation and hospitalization. This data is exactly consistent. Actually, it's a little better than Dr. Dudier, Raoul in France, in Marseille, France, where he doesn't use zinc, but still he intervenes early, and he had, I think, 88% reduction in death. And the government of Brazil actually implemented my protocols 3.5 weeks ago in a few hospitals and clinics, and they had a 95% reduction in death. They published the study. So now you have 3 continents, 3 doctors, groups who don't know each other, basically, all coming out and saying, and look at the great novel idea. If you treat early, you get better results. Wow, genius. It's unbelievable. Now, you're going to ask me, why is common sense not ruling? Well, I'll tell you the following. This is an election year. The president, for good or bad, and it doesn't matter my politics, it's irrelevant, but he came out backing this drug. It's a matter of record. He said it. I have a good feeling about it. I think it's going to be the biggest game changer. This happens to be an election year. Half the country doesn't want him to be president. It's been relentless war on his reputation, right? So anything that they can do to undermine, not to give him a victory, they'll do. It's just simple politics. It's logic, okay? So they rather see the enemies of humanity, I would call them, rather see this country's economy burn, people die, than to give the president a win. That's number one. Number two, go ahead.
No, go. Keep going. You're on the roll. Keep going.
I thought through this, by the way. It's a multifactorial what's going on. Number two, listen, the drug companies have invested millions of dollars. I like the drug companies. They save life. And they invested millions of dollars, billions of dollars in development of treatments and vaccines. And it's great. I didn't even want to hurt anyone. But the fact is, I came up with a solution, but the $20 essentially resolves the problem. I'm sure that's not a very good thing for people that invested billions of dollars. And I'm sorry, but my focus is not billions of dollars, it's human life. Number three, there's a lot of ego in the medical community. You know, some hick doctor, Hasidic doctor in upstate New York, thinks of a treatment for $20 where these Harvard researchers that sit and behind a desk thinking of ideas weren't able to. Could you imagine? And number four, which is a real big problem, doctors are afraid of liability. They're afraid to use these drugs because they're not familiar with them or because of the negative PR, because of the litigious nature of the society. So there's a lot of obstacles in using these drugs. The only thing is, none of it matters to me. I'll tell you why. Two years ago, I was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and I lost my right lung. It was called pulmonary artery sarcoma. It has 100% death rate. And for some reason, I'm still around. Doesn't make sense. So I'm looking at life from the other world in. I had already said goodbye to my children, essentially, emotionally. So when someone goes through that and is on the razor's edge of life and death, so then you realize that's really important. So I have no fear except for God. I really learned how to think outside the box. I actually developed my own treatment, believe it or not. And I realized it's not me, it's God. So, there's a saying from one of my mentors that he was being tortured by the KGB. And they took out a gun and they put it to his head and they said, this gun has made many people talk. So he answered them, maybe someone who has one world and many gods. But someone who has one God and two worlds, it's ineffective.
A genius. Okay, let me ask you. Keep going. That's a great quote. So
all this opposition by these, I don't know, I call them like maggots or whores. I don't know what it is. It's this epitome of evil that put politics and profit before human life. I have a zero tolerance for, and they're irrelevant to me, if that answers your question.
Let's go. New York City, the New York folks are the savviest and most common sense in the world. Since the word got clearly out on this with Rudy, and we were on WABC, and Rudy was on WABC, and you had a big group that was saying, hey, this is something you ought to think about if your doctor recommends it. And we noticed that the doctor-nurses teams did not have the casualty rates they had in Italy and others. Was it used, you think, in New York? Because I'm hearing now that people are saying, it wasn't used or where it was used. I think the New York Post has got today where it was used in the New York City hospitals. They didn't see any results or any positive results. What do you know about what actually happened in the hospitals and down on the front line of the battlefield in New York City?
Listen, I don't think, unfortunately, when someone is at the stage where they're on a respirator with acute respiratory distress syndrome, no matter what you do, there's going to be a 50 to 60% mortality rate. So has there been some success? Maybe. But really,
what about? But I'm saying as a prophylactic. I'm saying as a prophylactic for the doctors and nurses. Was it used as a prophylactic for doctors and nurses?
Sure. Any smart doctor that I know of is on this stuff, including myself.
Boom, Doctor, I just got to say, it's been a great joy listening to you because, first of all, we can just tell you're just such a solid guy. You bring up a KGB story to make your point. You are on the team, my friend. One thing I wanted to ask you, the FDA keeps putting out these guidelines, sort of making doctors feel a little bit threatened about prescribing this stuff. And I, in fact, talked to a doctor up in Westchester, one of the county health commissioners, about 2.5 weeks ago, and he said that they were just terrified about even prescribing it because of all of the messaging that they were getting from the FDA and even from the governor at that point. Now, go forward another week, and they were prescribing it to everybody. But they're saying, FDA is saying they don't want to see it outside of a hospital setting or a clinical trial due to heart risk. I think you've kind of answered that. But
first of all, I'm in direct contact. Stephen Hahn, the head of the FDA, literally called me on my cell phone. And I've been dealing with him directly. And actually, I organized it with a group, a very large hospital consortium from Long Island. Can't mention the name yet until next week because we're coming out with a study, a research study we're going to start where we're going to treat 750 patients. It's going to be a randomized controlled study, the kind that all these researchers worship. And It's going to take a few months. So, listen, let me give you an analogy. This is very important. Imagine Washington, D.C. is being carpet bombed, right? And would it make sense for Dr. Fauci to say, I think we need to do a study to see which bullets work the best? It may take 4 months, but we need to study it. Or would you use any bullet available to knock the plane out of the sky? So what's the difference? The difference is that we're being carpet bombed by an invisible enemy, so we have a perception of peacetime. But in reality, this is not peacetime. This is battlefield medicine. This is World War III. So to wait 4 months to do the results of a study and let an excess of a few 100,000 people die unnecessarily, I think is a crime against humanity. So,
Dr. Zelenko, yeah, we've got to bounce, but we want to know, we've got so many questions from the audience. Do you have a website or Twitter feed? How do people get access? You have a lot of people asking about dosage and everything like that, and I don't want to get into that, and I think you do, but is there a website, Twitter feed? How do they get more access to you?
Twitter, it's at Zev, that's zebra, E-V as in Victor, _ doctor, DR.
When is this paper? Is this being peer reviewed right now? When do you anticipate your counter offense against the mainstream media is going to really start with your paper? What's your timing on this?
Next week.
Next week the paper will be out.
God willing.
Do you have a website?
No. I'll figure something out.
Okay, fine. We'd love to have you back on, Dr. Zelenko. Jack, it's been a great honor to have you on. You're truly an American hero.
Doctor, thank you so much. Really,
God
really
bless you
great
all.
guy.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Dr. Vladimir, this is what a fourth turning's about. You're going to see all kind of characters in this as you go forward. He who is high will be low, and he who is low will be brought forward. Dr. Zelenko, very providential, terminal cancer patient. We're going to take a short commercial break. We're going to return with a throwdown about all of it and your comments when we return.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
That was epic. Dr. Vladimir Zelenko. That was epic.
And how awesome it is that what he said, 5 or 8 kids.
Unbelievable. Perfect. Let's go to, we've got a question. Why does the White House, and I'm not saying you got to put Zelenko up there, but in talking about mass on point, right? Mass on point. What did President Trump tweet out this morning? He wants to do what? Open big?
He wants to open big.
He wants to open big. If you want to open big, you have to open big with mass on point, right? Which is the flood the zone with therapeutics, flood the zone with testing, flood the zone with surveillance testing, flood the zone with antibody testing. Why do we not have that argument? Why was that argument had not been made from the podium over the last 6 weeks? Not made on Sean Hannity, not made on Laura Ingraham, not made on War Room Pandemic with Dr. Zelenko, but have somebody that's got that kind of information and can present like that. Don't have to be Dr. Zelenko, but say, hey, look, this is a war. It's on a battlefield. Nothing's perfect, but for a doctor thing, and just walk through the math, actually get the stories from New York City, because we know the doctors there are taking it as a prophylactic, and just explain it that way and push that message out.
Look, and it's not just during the coronavirus crisis. This goes back to impeachment as well. I mean, the White House has had a stunning lack of third-party validators all the way through. I mean, I remember in the early days of War Room impeachment, although we might get back to War Room impeachment pandemic
the sequel,
2020.
The sequel.
Right, sequel, the remix, coming up after this. But look, when I would call out the Federalist Society, I would call out and say, hey, where are AGs all around the country? Where are all of our former U.S. attorneys? So this isn't something that's brand new to the White House. It's something that is an ally I've raised a number of times. But going to right now, let's go to American public and who people trust. People trust doctors. In fact, there were those early stories where they said it was suggested Dr. Fauci and even Dr. Birx and others go up there with a white coat on. Because if you're up there talking with a white coat, then your believability goes up by 20, 30 points. But if you rank every profession, people put doctors right at the top. Doctors and teachers always like right at the top. Who's at the lowest? Politicians. Who's even lower than politicians? Members of Congress. So as we talk about who the White House needs to have up there to reaffirm these things, Steve, you're exactly right. We need doctors. We need scientists. We need subject matter experts. This is something that I do in the corporate space, even though I do with campaigns. I'll go and say to folks, look, you need to have voices outside of yourself who are advocating for your position. So people know that there's some commonality, there's some buy-in. We have these great stories. Dr. Zelenko, this guy's a hero. I mean, he is just such a passionate guy, a great communicator. He cuts against every stereotype that the media wants to go and try to push out there, try to say that anyone pushing hydroxychloroquine is a quack, or they're, and he's so passionate and so smart. Why you wouldn't have this guy out there briefing? And again, it's not as though Dr. Zelenko, I mean, look, we've had guests on here, Dr. Grace, who's been on the show, who's talked about his success in New York with hydroxychloroquine. These are all the people we should be highlighting because, again, we're not just informing the media, we're also fighting the media.
We had the representative, the female representative, African American from Michigan. They came on and said, she was, but why? She was one, and that went around. But why have we not had, his patients, the other patients, not just the doctors, also the people said, "Hey, this saved my life." Right? This was like this was like stopping the bleeding on a combatant.
Look, book the patients on Hannity. Book the patients on CNN,
and bring some to the podium. Let Phil Rucker and Jonathan Karl hear it from them and let them question those guys.
Right. Send them
average Americans.
Instead of having Fauci, Dr. Gobbledygook with the moving goalposts and sending him out to CNN for a 10th time, send some of these patients, go talk to Sanjay Gupta. Do a town hall literally with a bunch of recovered coronavirus patients with Sanjay Gupta.
You have 403, the way I calculate, 402 or 403 just in Monroe, New York are the environments.
There were the serious cases. He's got well over 1,000 who were treated for it. One of the things I really liked about the doctor is he has a wonderful way of speaking in the common man's vernacular, right?
Yeah.
He takes a complex subject and he makes it something that you can understand. And our viewers keep responding with amazing stuff. Just like they said, one of our best interviews, one guy said, Dr. Zelenko, I only fear God. What a hero. I mean, this is a guy who is a squared away person. And, there was a lot of resonance with when he touched upon why it is that perhaps this is being suppressed. And would be a shame if it was because of politics.
That is one of the most critical points when you talk about the White House press briefing and what Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx have been doing in there. And I understand that the task force came together very quickly, but you can add to that and you can augment. We played a clip last week, I think,
and you
Jason.
can delete.
Right. You said it. We played a clip last week, Jason, right, where we kind of got lost in what Dr. Birx was saying up there. We weren't really clear. Now there's also this transcript that's coming out and they're changing words and things like that. You listen to Dr. Zelenko, and it's not just straight to the facts, but it's speaking in a manner where everyone can understand.
Yeah.
Hey, you're getting carpet bombed. You use the bullets you have, right? That was the standout moment for me. It's like, wow, this guy actually understands the way people are thinking about this. And for a doctor to have that kind of ability to empathize and communicate with mass amounts of people, let alone patients like that, that's a rarity and should be leveraged.
Here's a tip for CNN. Is you ought to have Sanjay Gupta, and some of these guys are saying you need a double blind, and we got all that. You got to do double blinds. We got that. But you should have Zelenko and some of the battlefield surgeons. These are guys in the MASH units, okay? Let's have some MASH unit doctors in your town halls, right? And then put in a couple of people that have survived through this and put in other citizens. And maybe, and have Gupta and these other guys try to blow them up.
You don't think Gupta's already taken it?
I got to tell you, that's a great question. I'm here because the New York Post has a story about it didn't work in New York. That's a new thing they're pushing, theoretically. Although I know a lot of doctors that gave it out to their doctor nurse units.
But have we gotten to the bottom of why that study is being delayed?
I know what the reason is. If there was bad news in that study that was going to harm the president, you don't think that thing would have been leaked by Monday?
You're so cynical.
No, I guarantee you it's
so cynical.
So I agree with that.
You weren't that hard bitten before you came into the war room.
No, we've turned him.
Even in 18, when Jack ran the thing in 18, he wasn't cynical. He's gotten very cynical.
But do we know what their so-called reason is? Because this is pretty remarkable. It's going to be last Monday.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is going on a full 2 weeks. And Cuomo's he's not even saying like, oh, you know what? It's going to be like on the 27th. Yeah. I mean, he's just in, some point in the future. I mean, he's in the mumble tank on this.
Cuomo's freaking out. I mean, those numbers that came out yesterday showing a 14 to 15% total exposure for the entire state, 21% in New York, 16% out in Long Island.
But that's nothing. The bad number, yes, but the bad number was the nursing homes.
Yeah, the fact that maybe half the nursing home residents of the state have been exposed. They make up the most significant 40% of all the deaths are from people in nursing homes. If that's true, epic fail.
Let's go to the elephant in the room. Let's address. And this is, look, it couldn't get any more serious. There's over 50,000. Yeah. So we look at a different number of different sites. I think even CNN's got us close to crossing 50,000. Yeah. One of the main ones we look at had been over 50,000 this morning. I just want to remind everybody, Jack Maxey told us we were going to be 50,000 by Saturday. The point I keep making is these deaths, and this is not the recalibrations, these deaths are at a level and nobody's addressing it, right? And for the White House, I think is looking at 60 deaths by the end of May, right, in the model that they're talking about. We're going to be at 60,000. We're going to be at 60,000. We're going to be at 60,000. We're going to pass Vietnam by Wednesday, and we're going to pass 60,000 by Thursday or Friday before opening kickoff of the Big Open. The Big Open's 1 May.
You don't think we've already passed it?
60?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, when they go back, yes, in all likelihood, yes. Yes. When they go back and start taking, when they start going back and testing people that died,
I do think that.
Yes. But I'm saying even on this count, right? Like it's like the thing in China. Was it 19 million with the missing phones, or is it a couple of million? We don't know.
Oh, but I mean, China unreliable, right? But take even the UK numbers. What the Office for National Statistics said. In
UK is a kind of a disaster. The testing the whole thing.
But hold on,
you guys? Is the Tory government taking it seriously?
No, but I mean, does the Tory government take anything seriously? But the Austrians had the same thing. The Italians had the same thing. The Spanish had the same thing. You go back and you revise the numbers. I mean, the US numbers are probably over 60,000. What's
the breaking news out of the Guardian right now about this?
So this is an exclusive to the Guardian that popped about an hour ago. The headline is "Coronavirus detected on particles of air pollution." Scientists are examining whether this route enables infections at longer distances. This is preliminary work in Italy, in the Bergamo province. One urban and one industrial site. Italian scientists using outdoor air pollution samples and saying that they effectively are finding very, very small particles of the coronavirus on air droplets and air pollution particles. And as I say, preliminary, but this is obviously deeply concerning if this thing is more airborne than we think.
The reason is also that's a whole thing about weaponization. Media matters, calm down. We're saying it's got to be investigated. But I tell you what, as a guy that knows China, the thing that jumps off of me right away, if that's the case, how is Beijing and Shanghai's numbers so low?
Right.
Beijing is the most polluted place on earth. Well, they've been wearing those masks for years.
Look, we know from the South China Morning Post this week that at a minimum, China had at least 4 times as many cases. That's a study from University of Hong Kong that came out. But also, as AEI has done, that we know that China has hid tens of thousands of deaths. So, look, even Dr. Birx, they said, put a big old asterisk by anything that China puts out for numbers.
Okay, we've got this segment, another. We're not going to do the China part, Weingarten and others in economy until 11 o'clock hour. Let's go back to the anything, Jack, your summary of Zelenko. What was your biggest takeaway? You're Mr. Hydroxy. What was your biggest takeaway from the Zelenko interview?
My biggest takeaway from the Zelenko interview is just characteristics that I like in leaders, which is you're honest, you're straightforward, you have courage, particularly moral courage. I mean, think what it's taken this guy to be getting hammered every day and continue to go out there and save lives. And I think one of the big reveals from this today was he's mentioned before in the press that he had an underlying condition. This guy's got one lung, and he is out there in the trenches treating people for one of the most dangerous respiratory diseases in history. I'm sorry, man. This guy is like my new hero. I want to go out and have a beer with this guy.
Extraordinary individual. Science is objective truth. I would love to see him in a throwdown with Sanjay Gupta. Or some of these guys on MSNBC they bring in, right?
I know I'm going to be quoting this guy forever. I mean, that comment about my friend with the KGB gun to his head, he said this might work.
I don't think it's Fox he should be going on. He should be going on MSNBC. He should be on the Rachel Maddow show. Rachel, why don't you have Dr. Zelenko on there, right? They should be Dr. Zelenko.
Look, put him on the Sunday shows. I mean, we know we have listeners like Chuck Todd and George Stephanopoulos and
Sleepy
Margaret
Eye.
Brennan and
Sleepy Eye.
Why don't they book Dr. Zelenko? You know, I mean, rather than some of the rubes that, rather than put on Nancy Pelosi, you get up there and yammer about wiping her nose and then touching the microphone in the House well yesterday.
That was such a cheat.
Sorry, Steve. I know you took that one personally.
I did.
It's
because
gross.
she's outscarfing. She's trying to outscarf Ambassador Dr. Colonel.
She's
rubbing her
taking
nose
Jair Bolsonaro's lead, wiping his nose and shaking hands with the old lady.
Was that owning the libs? Was she owning the libs when she was wiping her nose and wiping the microphone?
She was owning you guys. You guys, everybody went nuts. Okay, for the next segment, let's tee it up. We're going to talk about bleach and light, right? Yesterday's because we got to, because it's a complete meltdown. MSM, CNN, and Morning Joe were absolutely medieval when they came on this morning, right? They had worked all night on that. They had the Simpsons sketch. They had these guys were off the chain. In fact, they were so off the chain, I think they repeated the entire initial beatdown again at 8 o'clock.
Oh, CNN at 6 a.m. this morning did basically a PSA urging people to ignore everything the president said yesterday.
Unbelievable.
There's no one less convincing to tell you not to do something than immediately after the press conference, Jim Acosta saying, please don't do this at home. If anything,
we're going to play that when we
that's
come
going to make people do it.
Hashtag war and pandemic. Want to hear all your thoughts, your observations. What do you think about bleach and what do you think about the inner light? We're going to return in just a minute with the entire War Room posse. Hashtag war and pandemic. Tell us what you think.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful.
So, Steve, that was President Trump at yesterday's press conference, and which has the media completely up in arms this morning, melting down. Let's dive into it.
Well, I'll throw it out there first. Look, I think the podium ought to be a no-riff zone. He is a wartime president. He's going to be weighed and measured. And all these people are sitting there telling him, hey, it's going to be what happens in the future with vaccines and therapies. He's going to be weighed and measured about how he's coming through this. FDR, he is a wartime president. And when he's up there doing power moves, it's incredibly impressive. But it's a no-riff zone. FDR didn't sit there and go, maybe we're going to do go up through the back of the Mediterranean or something like that. You don't riff. You're up there, and those kind of conversations should take place in some other thing and come out, boom, here's what we're doing. What I'd like to see is to go to this massive point and come out with the 50 different therapies you're working on, right? Just, hey, this is what we do. We got the stuff at Fort Detrick's that John Solomon's talking about. We got this. I have no problem with doing outside the box. You've got optionality, you got option value. You have certain things that we're moving down, hydroxy. We got all these, bang, bang, bang. I got 10 of those, an NIH, FDA. I got every university lab in the world. Boom, boom, boom. I got 100 of these. And by the way, I've got some outside the box stuff, right? Yeah, but make it a power move and not a riff.
Right. And look, having worked for President Trump, and just as you did, he internalizes everything. And so it can be some little briefing, but he's very smart in who he listens to. And so he won't take ideas from, complete quacks. I mean, this will be some briefing or some journal or some report that he got. He'll internalize part of it. Like you said, he was riffing yesterday. And so I'll take you back to an example. Yes, I understand, folks, total apples and oranges when it comes to the subject matter, but the pallets of cash. How much time did we waste on the campaign with the pallets of cash and people saying it's fake and it's not happening? Then it turns out that actually there were pallets of cash. He had picked up some of that from a report, internalized it, then it came back. I think he was riffing then, I believe, in an interview or a tweet or whatever the case. So clearly in this interview here, when he talked about it, he was asking Dr. Birx, what do you think about this? He must have picked this up from some briefing where he was talking about it. He's saying, obviously, this would need to be medical doctors. He was not telling
obviously,
people
the guy was right there, had briefed him somehow,
right,
and then ended up on the podium.
But
that's what I'm saying. There should be some sort of maybe a little organized framework to do that.
Right, and here is the thing where whoever briefed him on that, wherever these downloads are coming from, however they do the kind of their task force version version of the presidential daily briefing. They need to have that person there. So whether that's the vice president, whether that's Fauci, whether that's Birx, if they're the person that briefed them, and then the president starts talking about it, you got to be there to be that support system, whether you're the scientist, whether you're a medical professional. It's not as though President Trump just made that up. And he clearly said, hey, you got to go everything we're doing here through doctors. But someone briefed him on that. Why didn't they step up and say, let me go and tell you, let's go back through what you and I had been discussing. Yes, does he need to not riff on this? Yes, of course. But was he going and making something up? No.
I think we need to take a bit of our own advice here and be even more clear, because there will be the Media Matters and the Jim Acostas and all these guys listening to this and going, oh, they're trying to excuse away this thing that everyone now is saying, and Lysol's putting out press releases and all this stuff. Look, let's be very clear. The president wasn't talking about injecting Lysol into your veins. He wasn't talking about shining a light down your throat, right? What he's talking about, look, I'm not a doctor, but it's clear to most people that the body has its own internal disinfectant. It's clear to people that there are lots of experiments going on right now as per, how you reduce the viral load, all of this kind of thing. And yes, okay, the president was riffing on that sort of thing and, just throwing out ideas and questions, get a conversation started in a room full of people that he knew if he doesn't riff, they're just going to throw gotcha questions at him the whole time, right? And maybe he shouldn't do that. Maybe that's not such a great idea when you know that the people in the room have a vested interest in making you look bad. I get that. Also, though, listen to the specificity of the words he used. He didn't say, we're going to do that, or can we try that? He says something like that. Something like that.
Should we play it one more time just to make sure we...
And then Jim Acosta.
Yeah, and then Jim Acosta.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning, because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful.
See the words like and almost and concept, right? At no point is this medical advice. Listen to Jim Acosta. And listen to the way
getting back to what John was talking about, I mean, this is sort of becoming President Trump's traveling medicine show. The way he is coming into these briefings from time to time and putting out there some very questionable ideas in terms of how to treat the coronavirus. In addition to saying that the sunlight could kill the coronavirus, he was saying at one point, I'm just trying to read this, suppose that we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or very powerful light, and I think you said it hasn't been checked and you're going to test it, saying that if you hit the body with light in some way, that would kill the coronavirus. And then, Aaron, he went one step further. He said, then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in 1 minute. Is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? The president appeared to be suggesting at one point that you can inject disinfectants into people to kill the coronavirus. And we want to caution everybody at home, please don't do that. Please.
That's clearly not what he said.
But Acosta uses the words later on in that clip. He says, do not follow the president's medical advice. It wasn't medical advice. And that's the whole thing about this. You're taking the abstraction, a mind that generates abstractions and concepts and things like that versus the literal definition of advice and prescription. And that's how these guys are playing this off right now. It's obviously nonsense. Okay. And now that I've said all that, I'll get back to my treatment.
For the radio audience and the podcast audience, he just brought up his Lysol. Being a Brit, he had to bring the British. We got Clorox. We've got Clorox in the back.
By the way, while we're Steve, after you say that, because my wife texted me, she's like, "You didn't do the Tide Pod challenge, did you?" I'm like, "No, come on."
Okay, short commercial break. We're in turn. Ben Weingarten from the Federalist is going to be with us. Great article about Tiananmen